In this video, I want to talk about anatomy of the heart. As you know, the heart is located in our thoracic cavity between our two lungs. In this part, I want to talk about the location of the heart, the major blood vessels which come out of the heart or go inside the heart, and also the chambers of the heart and their structures. Before I start talking about anatomy of the heart, I want to talk about its histology. In this picture, you can see the histology of cardiac muscle. The cardiac muscle cells, as you see here, are cylindrical in their shape. They can show branching. I want to recall the other muscles which we have in our body. The first muscle, which you learned about it before, is the skeletal muscle. The skeletal muscles are cylindrical in their shape. They have striations inside, and they have nucleus which are located beneath the cell membrane. They are multinucleated cells, so the number of their nuclei are more than one. The other muscle cell, which you learned about it before, is the smooth muscle cells. Here is the picture of a smooth muscle cell. We don't have any striation in the cell. The shape of the cell is fusiform or slender, and they contain one round nucleus which is located in the middle of the cell. And the last type of muscles are cardiac muscles. The cardiac muscles are cylindrical. They can show branching pattern at their both ends. They have striations inside the cell, and they may have one nucleus or two nuclei, which are located in the center of the cell. When one cardiac muscle cell wants to join with the other cell like this, between them we have a specific structure which we call it intercalated disc. The intercalated disc is the junction between two cells. This junction is composed of gap junction and desmosomes. As you know, the gap junctions are tiny tunnels between two adjacent cells. The gap junction can help transmission of electricity, ATP, or different types of nutrient between cells. And the desmosomes is the cell junction which can help the cells attach to each other physically. So in the intercalated disc, we can see both gap junctions and desmosomes. The gap junction can help transmission of electricity very fast in our cardiac muscle myocardium or cardiac muscle cells. So the different parts of our heart can go to contraction at the same time, which we call it syncytium. Here you can see the histology picture of the cardiac muscle cell. If you want to see one of the cell, it's like this. Let me draw the boundary for this cell. So this is one cardiac muscle cell. In this cardiac muscle cell, you can see the nucleus in the middle of the cell, in the center of the cell. You have many striations, and you can see branching pattern. When one cell wants to join to the neighboring cell, you can see these lines, or this one, or this one, or this. We call them intercalated disc. The intercalated disc has gap junction and desmosome. the heart. You know that our heart has 4 chambers. 2 chambers are located superior. We call them right and left atria. And 2 chambers are located inferior, and we call them right and left ventricle. The right side of our heart deals with deoxygenated blood, and the left side works with oxygenated blood. In the anatomy models, in anatomy pictures, deoxygenated blood are blue in color, while oxygenated blood are red in color. So you can see these 2 colors, which can help you to identify these blood types. Then you can see the major blood vessels in this picture. You see one vein come to our right atrium from top. This vein is called superior vena cava. Superior vena cava can bring the deoxygenated blood from the top part of the heart to our heart, from our head, neck, upper chest, and upper limb. The other blood vessel, the other vein, which come to the right atrium is called inferior vena cava, which carry deoxygenated blood from the parts which are located below than the heart. And the other blood vessel, which you can see in the right side of the heart, which originates from our right ventricle, is called pulmonary trunk. So this is the pulmonary trunk. As you see here, the superior vena cava, inferior vena cava, which are the veins which come to our right atrium, and pulmonary trunk, which is the artery and originates from right ventricle, are blue in their color. It means that they work with deoxygenated blood. In the other side of the heart, you can see the other blood vessels. One of these blood vessels are called pulmonary veins. We have 4 pulmonary veins in our heart. Here you can see 2 of them. 2 pulmonary veins come from left lung, 2 pulmonary veins come from right lung. And all of these 4 veins come to the left atrium. Their color are red because they carry oxygenated blood. And the last and the most important blood vessel which we have in our body is called aorta. The aorta can carry oxygenated blood from our left ventricle to all parts of the heart, the body. So these are the major blood vessels which you can see. In the right side, we have blue blood vessels. In the left side, we have red blood vessels. Although our pulmonary trunk is the artery but this is the only artery which carry the oxygenated blood. Although the pulmonary veins are vein, but they carry oxygenated blood, and they are the only exception which their colors are red. Again, in this picture, you can see right side and left side of the heart. Right side of the heart works with deoxygenated blood, and left side works with oxygenated blood. You can see the arteries and veins in this picture. The superior vena cava and inferior vena cava bring the oxygenated blood to the right atrium. And the pulmonary trunk originates from right ventricle and carry the oxygenated blood to our lungs. The pulmonary veins, which you can see 4 of them here, can carry oxygenated blood from the lung to our heart to the left atrium, and the aorta originates from left ventricle and carry oxygenated blood to all parts of the body. In our heart, we have 2 groups of valves. The green valves, which you can see here, are called AV valves or atrioventricular valve. Between the right atrium and the right ventricle, we have right AV valve. Between the left atrium and left ventricle, we have left AV valve. The other name of a right AV valve is tricuspid, and the other name for left AV valve is bicuspid or mitral. So you can use any of these names when you want to mention these valves. The tricuspid means this valve has 3 parts. You can see 1, 2, 3 parts for this valve. And the bi means 2. So in bicuspid valve, we only have 2 cusps. The other valves which you can see in this picture are called semilunar valves. They are located at the beginning of pulmonary trunk and aorta. They prevent regurgitation of blood. They don't let the blood regurgitate and flow back from the arteries to the ventricles. We call them pulmonary semilunar valve and aortic semilunar valve. In this picture, you can see the location of the heart. The heart is located in the mediastinal cavity. And as you see in this picture, the left part of the left side of our heart has a tapered and pointed part, which we call it apex of the heart. And the apex of our heart is toward the left side of our body. So we can hear the sound of the heart in the left side better than the right side. And we have the other landmark for our heart, which we call it base of the heart. Actually, base of the heart is here. This is the location where the blood vessels, the pulmonary trunk, and the aorta come out of the heart. We call this region, this landmark, base of our heart. This is the base of the heart, and this part is apex. talked about it in lecture for you. The wall of our heart has 3 layers. From inside to outside, we have endocardium, myocardium, which is the cardiac muscle cells, and epicardium. And you know that the epicardium is actually the visceral pericardium. In this picture, again, you can see the right atrium and left atrium, the right ventricle and left ventricle. Between the right and left ventricle, you can see a wall. This wall is called interventricular septum. So let me write the name for you here. Interventricular septum is the septum which is located between 2 ventricles. And between 2 atria, we have the other wall, which we call it interatrial septum. And you can see the interatrial septum here. In this picture, you can see the tricuspid valve, the bicuspid or mitral valve, the pulmonary semilunar valve, and the aortic semilunar valve. Superior vena cava, inferior vena cava, pulmonary trunk, pulmonary veins in this side, left side, and also from right side, and the aorta. When you want to identify the aorta from the pulmonary trunk, you need to pay attention that the aorta comes up, which we call it ascending aorta. Then it makes the arch, which we call it aortic arch, and then it comes down, which we call it descending aorta. Here, I want to introduce 3 blood vessels from the aortic arch for you. Look at here. This is the aortic arch, and you have 3 blood vessels from the aortic arch. From right to left, we call them brachiocephalic, artery is the first one. After that, we have left common carotid artery, and the last one is called left subclavian artery. So you can see 3 blood vessels here which originates from the aortic arch. The first one is called brachiocephalic. The middle one is left common carotid, and the last one is left subclavian artery. In this picture, again, you can see the wall of the heart. From inside to outside, we have endocardium, myocardium, which is composed of cardiac muscles, and epicardium, or visceral layer of pericardium. After the visceral layer, you can see the parietal layer and the fibrous layer of pericardium. Between visceral and parietal, we have a cavity which we call it pericardial cavity. In this cavity, we have a small amount of fluid. When I want to talk about the anatomy of the heart, first I need to identify the anterior and posterior surface of the heart. First, I want to talk about anterior surface. Look at this picture. In this picture, you can see the anterior view of the heart. In the anterior view of the heart, you can see the origin of pulmonary trunk and aorta. And also, you can see two important structures. These structures are this one and this one. We call them right and left auricles. The right and left auricles are the small pouch which are connected to our right and left atrium. They are a little, have a shrinked appearance. Auricle in Latin means ear, and these auricles are like the ear of the elephant. Because of that, we call them auricle. They are the small pouches which can reserve a small amount of blood in themselves. And you can only see these auricles from the anterior view. So in the real heart, you can see the auricles. This is the right auricle. This is the left auricle. And you can see the pulmonary trunk and aorta. The first part of aorta is ascending aorta, and then you have aortic arch. And I told you that from the aortic arch, we have three branches: brachiocephalic, left common carotid, and left subclavian artery. This is the anterior view. In the next picture, you can see the posterior view of the heart. In the posterior view of the heart, we can see mostly the veins. You can see superior vena cava and inferior vena cava. You can see pulmonary veins, and you cannot see the auricles. So, by paying attention to these points, you can figure out which side is anterior and which side is posterior. So in this side, you have superior vena cava. You can see the inferior vena cava, and you have right and left pulmonary veins, and no auricles can be seen from this view. This is the posterior aspect of the heart. And in the real picture, in the real heart, you can see the pulmonary veins here. And this is the opening of inferior vena cava. And you don't have any auricles here. So this is the posterior view of the heart. In this slide, you can see the anterior and posterior view of the heart. As I told you before, in the anterior view, we can see the origin of the arteries and we can see the right and left auricle. And in posterior view, we don't have any auricle and we can mostly see the veins. In the base of the heart, between atria in top and ventricles in bottom, we have a groove which you can see it in this green color. This groove or this depression is called coronary sulcus, and it circles our heart completely. The coronary sulcus is the location of the coronary arteries and veins. You need to know that although we have blood in the chambers of our heart, but this blood cannot penetrate to the wall of the heart. And we need some blood vessels which come to the wall of the heart and nourish the cardiac muscle cells. These blood vessels are called coronary arteries and coronary veins. In the coronary sulcus, we have some of these coronary arteries and veins, and they are protected by adipose tissue which cover these blood vessels. So this green line represents coronary sulcus. In the next picture, you can see two other sulci. We have one groove or one depression in the anterior surface of the heart between right ventricle and left ventricle. We call it anterior interventricular sulcus. And we have one in the back of the heart between right and left ventricle, and we call it posterior interventricular sulcus. Again, in these two interventricular sulci, we have coronary arteries and veins, and they are covered by adipose tissue. Again, in this picture, you can see the superior vena cava, inferior vena cava, which come to the right atrium, pulmonary trunk, which originates from right ventricle and divides into two branches to go to right and left lung. You can see four pulmonary veins in purple color, which bring oxygenated blood back to the left atrium. And you can see the aorta in yellow, which carry oxygenated blood to all parts of our body. You can see ascending aorta, aortic arch, and descending aorta. The aortic arch has three branches. One of them is called brachiocephalic. The middle one is left common carotid, and the last one is called left subclavian artery. Between the right atrium and right ventricle, you can see tricuspid valve, and between left atrium and left ventricle, you can see bicuspid or mitral valve. At the beginning of pulmonary trunk, you have pulmonary semilunar valve, and at the beginning of aorta, you have aortic semilunar valve. And this is the interventricular septum. You can see all of these features in this picture too. Superior vena cava, inferior vena cava, pulmonary veins, pulmonary trunk, and ascending aorta and aortic arch. Brachiocephalic, left common carotid and left subclavian artery. Tricuspid valve and bicuspid valve. Pulmonary semilunar valve and aortic semilunar valve. Interventricular septum between two ventricles and interatrial septum between two atria. The first chamber which I want to talk about is right atrium. Look at here. The right atrium receives deoxygenated blood from three veins. One of them is superior vena cava, one of them is inferior vena cava, and the last one, which I didn't mention it before, is called coronary sinus. Let me show it to you. This is the opening of coronary sinus. The coronary sinus receives deoxygenated blood of the wall of the heart. So we have three openings here. The other feature which you can see in the right atrium is this. In interatrial septum, you can see the oval depression. We call it oval fossa or fossa ovalis. Let me write it down for you. The oval fossa is the remnant of the foramen or the hole or the opening which we have between two atria during fetal period. In the fetal period, when the fetus is in the uterus of the mother, we don't have any respiration. We don't have any breathing. So the blood in the right atrium and left atrium can connect together by the foramen or the hole which we have here. After birth, this foramen is covered by the muscular flap, and we don't have any opening after that. It takes about 48 hours after birth for this foramen to become completely closed. And we can see the remnant of the foramen as a depression here, which we call it oval fossa. The other thing which you can see in the right atrium is this. Inside the right atrium is completely smooth, but the auricle, which is attached to the right atrium, has rough surface inside. They are muscles, the muscle ridges which you can see them, and we call them pectinate muscles. So the pectinate muscles are the muscles which you can see inside the auricles. This is about the right atrium. And here you can see the fossa ovalis or oval fossa, the remnant of opening of the fetal period. The next structure which I want to show you are the structures which we have in the right ventricle. Inside the right ventricle, you have many muscle ridges. We call them trabeculae carneae. So the muscle ridges which you have inside the ventricle is called trabeculae carneae. And we have 3 cone-shaped muscles in the right ventricle. 2 of them are here and the next one is here. We call them papillary muscle. So we have 3 cone-shaped papillary muscle in the right ventricle. But what is the function of these papillary muscles? Look at here. The papillary muscles and the tricuspid valve are connected together by some strands. These strands are called corda tendineae. These corda tendineae can make this attachment. When the ventricle is in relaxation form, the muscles are relaxed, the corda tendineae become slack, and the valves are open. So the blood can come from atrium to ventricle. When the ventricle go to contraction, the papillary muscle become contracted, the corda tendineae become taut, and they can close the valve. So we don't have any communication at that time between atrium and ventricle. So inside the right ventricle, you can see tricuspid valve, you can see papillary muscles, you can see corda tendineae, and we have trabeculae carneae or muscle ridges inside this ventricle. In this picture, you can see the valve, the tricuspid valve, the papillary muscle, and the corda tendineae, which can connect the valve to the muscle. Pay attention, I told you that in the right ventricle, we have 3 papillary muscles. And here you can see them, 1, 2, 3. One of them has 2 parts. Now about left atrium. The left atrium is very similar to right atrium. It has very smooth surface. The auricle, which is attached to the left atrium, which we call it left auricle, has pectinate muscle inside. In interatrial septum, you can see the fossa ovalis or oval fossa. Here you can see the hole. This heart is from the fetus. So you can see the hole which is present between right and left atrium. And the only difference between right and left atrium is this. In the left atrium, you have opening of pulmonary veins. 4 openings. 2 veins come from right lung, 2 veins come from left lung. And the last chamber is the left ventricle. In the left ventricle, we have the same features like right ventricle. You can see muscle ridges, which we call them trabeculae carneae. You can see the apex of the heart in left ventricle. You can see 2 papillary muscles. Pay attention, 2 papillary muscles. And the papillary muscles are attached to the mitral valve by the corda tendineae. So in our heart, we have 5 papillary muscles. 3 of them are in right ventricle, 2 of them are in left ventricle. And you need to know that the thickness of muscles are different in different parts of the heart. The wall of the atria, right and left atrium, are very, very thin. The ventricles have thicker wall, but the wall of left ventricle is 3 times thicker than the right ventricle, because the left ventricle wants to send blood to all parts of the body, so it needs thicker wall and more muscles. But the right ventricle wants to send blood to the lungs. The lungs are at the same level of the heart, so it doesn't need that much force to send the blood. So the wall of right side is thinner. The last anatomy feature which I want to show you is this green ligament. Look at here. This ligament, which we call it ligamentum arteriosum, is located between aortic arch and pulmonary trunk. Again, during fetal period, we have a shunt, a duct between aorta and pulmonary trunk, so the blood in these 2 blood vessels can mix together because we don't have breathing in the fetus. And after birth, after the first and second breathing, this shunt should become closed. And instead of the shunt, we have a ligament, which we call it ligamentum arteriosum. This ligamentum arteriosum doesn't have any function. Just we use it as a landmark, a very important nerve, which we call it left recurrent laryngeal nerve, pass on the surface of this ligament. And when we have surgery in the mediastinum, the surgeon should pay attention to this ligament and that nerve, because if they cut the nerve, the voice of that person is completely gone. So we use it as a landmark at the time of surgeries, not more than that. Here again, you can see the heart valves. You can see the right atrioventricular valve or tricuspid, left atrioventricular valve or bicuspid or mitral, pulmonary semilunar valve, and aortic semilunar valve. And this is the transverse section. These are the AV valves, right and left. And here you can see the pulmonary and aortic semilunar valves. These valves work opposite. When the bicuspid and tricuspid are closed, the pulmonary and aortic valves are open. When the bicuspid and tricuspid are open, the semilunar valves are closed. And I will talk about it in the lecture in physiology of the heart completely. And the last part, which I want to show it to you, is the coronary circulation. I told you that we need some blood vessels, some arteries and veins for the wall of the heart. First, I want to talk about arteries. We have some major arteries, coronary arteries, which you need to know their name. One of them is this one. We call it right coronary artery. When the ascending aorta wants to leave the heart, The first branches of this aorta are right and left coronary artery. So first, the aorta gives blood to the heart itself, and then it distributes blood to the other parts of the body. The right coronary artery can nourish the right side of the heart, and the left coronary artery can nourish the left side of the heart. The right coronary artery can make one branch in the medial border of the heart. We call it right marginal artery. And then this right coronary artery go to the back of the heart, go to the posterior interventricular sulcus, and make posterior interventricular artery. So what happened here? The right coronary artery comes out of the aorta from the right side. It goes to the right side of the heart. It has one important branch in the medial border of the heart, which we call it right marginal, and then it goes to the back of the heart, to the posterior interventricular sulcus, and make posterior interventricular artery. The left coronary arteries come out of ascending aorta from the left side and nourish the left side of the heart. When it comes out of the aorta, it makes two branches. One of them goes to the anterior interventricular sulcus. We call it anterior interventricular artery. One of them goes to the left side of the heart, and we call it circumflex artery. So the anterior interventricular and the circumflex artery are the important branches of left coronary arteries. And you need to memorize these names. And for the veins, we have 4 major veins. In the anterior interventricular sulcus, the name of the vein is great cardiac vein. In the posterior interventricular sulcus, the name of the vein is middle cardiac vein. And in the coronary sulcus, in the back of our heart, we have 2 veins. One of them is thin, one of them is thick. The thin one is called a small cardiac vein, and the thick one is called coronary sinus. All of these veins can collect deoxygenated blood of cardiac muscles, and the coronary sinus bring this blood to the right atrium. This is about the coronary circulations of the heart.